Anaru awakens the next morning to crackles of burning wood and a tree falling nearby. His wife, full of life, now lays lifeless in his arms. He must bury Lana. Walking to the tree where they first kissed, the place where he asked her to be his wife, he digs methodically with a rock, then places her body in the shallow grave, covering her face with a cloth, before he heaps dirt and then rocks upon her. Finally, he kneels before the grave, weeping as he places flowers upon it. Leaving the grave, Anaru searches for his son's body as ash from the raging fires across the island continues to fall from the sky. He hopes to give him a burial beside his mother. He sees nothing but thick, black rock where the canoes were the night before. Tears cannot fall, for all he has known is tears. He finds his canoe hidden in a remote cove under large trees behind an enormous rock. Miraculously, the ship is whole and repaired, how they left it before the fire serpent destroyed the island. Anaru was planning to leave with Lana and his son. They were sailed back to his people to receive the ceremonies of a new prince born into the warlord's family. He and Lana mended and decorated the ship's sail together. She painstakingly stitched the image of his ancestral spear with a red tip into the sails. This spear, a warning to all the islands that the warlord's family sails here. Most of the outer islands have never heard of the warlord or his desire to rule all the islands. Inside the canoe, in fine cloth, he finds a spear imbued with otherworldly power. These powers have granted his family's bloodline victory against their enemies. With much searching, he gathers supplies like coconuts, breadfruit, taro, kava, and fishing gear. As Anaru walks through the charred remains of the empty village, his heart is heavy as he looks for any survivors or useful material. Heart heavy with grief, he pushes the ship into the waves and jumps into the canoe. Sighing, he speaks to his wife left behind. My love, you and our son will always be in my heart. I return home as promised to see my father and take my place as the next great chief. "16 years later, on a distant island, in a peaceful clearing where the air smells of salt and the earth, Amanaki stood in the clearing, his staff in hand, facing his grandmother and adopted mother. The sun hung low, casting long shadows as his grandmother, wise and weathered, nodded approvingly at his stance. Remember, Amanaki, his grandmother said, her voice calm but firm. A staff is an extension of yourself. It is not just a weapon, but a tool of balance. You must flow with it, not force it. Amanaki adjusted his grip, his brow furrowed in concentration. Like water, always moving, never rigid? She smiled, her eyes twinkling. Exactly. Now, show me your strike. With a deep breath, Amanaki swept the staff in a wide arc, aiming at the air as though it was his opponent. His grandmother blocked it with a swift practice motion. Good, she said, but your timing is off. Focus on your opponent's movement, not your own. Amanaki nodded, stepped back to try again. His mother, watching from the side, stepped forward with a soft smile. Amanaki, she called, her voice gentle but filled with warmth. Strength doesn't just come from your arms. It's in your heart, your spirit, and your legs. Remember that. He looked at her, his mother's eyes filled with love and encouragement. She placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. I'll never stop loving you, no matter how many times you fall, Amanaki, she said softly. But you must learn to rise each time. Amanaki's heart swelled with gratitude. As he nodded, his resolve deepening. "I will, Mom. I won't disappoint you." His grandmother chuckled, a soft, knowing sound. "With your mother's strength and my guidance, you'll become a warrior, Amanaki. But never forget, true warriors protect. They do not seek to harm." Amanaki tightened his grip on the staff, feeling the weight of their words. He was ready. As Amanaki's staff met the air in another practice strike, something shifted within him, a feeling he had not experienced before. The clearing, with its sun-dappled grass, and the sounds of birds in the trees began to blur, as though reality itself was fading. His grandmother's voice, though steady, seemed distant. "Amanaki, focus," she said, but her words echoed faintly, as if muffled by a heavy fog. Suddenly, Amanaki felt a pull, like an invisible current, drawing him away from the world around him. The sunlight dimmed, and the edges of the clearing faded into soft darkness. His body grew light, as though weightless, and before he could make sense of it, he found himself standing in a shadowy void, no longer in the familiar forest, but in a place where the shadows swirled like tendrils of smoke. The air was thick, almost electric, and Amanaki realized he was no longer holding his staff. His breath came in shallow gasps, his heart racing. This was different. This was not just part of his training. A voice, familiar yet distant, reached him. It was similar to his grandmother's, but older, gravelly, as it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Step into the shadows," she intoned, her words slow and deliberate. "Here you are not bound by the physical world. In this place, your mind is the weapon, and the shadows are your ally." Amanaki hesitated. Then he felt it, a subtle shift, a whisper of energy. His dreams had spoken of the shadows before, of how they could be manipulated, how a warrior could slip between them to move unseen. He had never understood it, but now, in this strange space, he felt the potential, the power within him. The voice echoed now, softer but steady. "Your heart is your guide, Amanaki. Follow it. The shadows are not to be feared. They are part of you. Use them as you would your staff, with grace and intention." Amanaki closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself, feeling the shadows tug at him like a cloak. The moment he stepped forward, it was as though he dissolved into them. His body merged with the darkness, and he moved swiftly, silently, as though the very shadows carried him. He blinked, and in the next breath he was back in the clearing, his feet planted firmly on the soft grass. His grandmother was still watching him, her gaze unwavering. "Shadow Walker," his grandmother said, her voice filled with pride. "You've taken the first step, Amanaki. This is your father's clan's ancient gift. Until now, I did not believe it was possible. The shadows are yours to command, but remember, they are not for selfish use. Always move with purpose." Amanaki's breath came slower now, a sense of peace washing over him. He could feel the shadows still lingering inside him, waiting for the next time he would call on them. With a final glance at his mother, who smiled at him with quiet love and admiration, he nodded. "I understand," he said, the weight of what happened settling in. He had learned something more today, not just the way of the staff, but the deeper path that lay ahead, a path that would require both strength and wisdom, darkness and light. And so, the training continued every day, for days stretched into weeks that turned into months. The sun had barely risen over the village when Amanaki, in the quiet moments of his training, heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. He glanced up to see Lani, his best friend, her bright eyes filled with excitement, coming down the path toward him. The sea breeze tousled her hair, as she waved enthusiastically. "Amanaki, ready for our sailing lesson?" she called, her voice full of energy. "I swear every time we sail it feels like we're getting closer to something amazing. Come on, let's go!" Amanaki smiled, his heart lightening at the thought of the sea. He had always felt a deep connection to the water, and their training by the shore had become something he cherished. "I'm ready. Let's get going," he said, grabbing his staff and slinging a small bag over his shoulder. As they were walking up the spotted path, a familiar voice shouted from ahead of them. "Look who thinks they're a sailor now!" Iakopa, the village bully, strutted up to them, flanked by his usual gang of friends, all with smug expressions on their faces. "You're not really going to the sea, are you? The sea's no place for a fire demon spawn like you." Lonnie rolled her eyes and moved to stand in front of Amanaki, crossing her arms. "We're going, Iakopa. You can stay here and pretend you're tough, or you can get out of our way." Iakopa grinned, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, we'll get out of the way all right. Just wanted to see if you needed some help." He and his friends laughed, clearly itching for a fight. Amanaki's grip on his staff tightened, but instead of meeting aggression with aggression, he closed his eyes and stepped into the shadows. The world around him seemed to stretch and bend, and the light of the morning became softer, almost dim. He felt the familiar pull of the shadows, the gentle way they wrapped around him, allowing him to move unseen, his steps light and swift. Lonnie glanced over, surprised when Amanaki seemed to vanish into the fading light. "Amanaki?" she whispered, but he was already gone. From the shadows, Amanaki reached out with a quiet, calculated touch. He slipped behind Iakopa and untied the knot of his belt, the thread slipping free without a sound. With a soft tug, Iakopa's shorts were suddenly at odds with the ground. As he pulled at his shorts, they fell before he could react. He tumbled forward, trying to hop and cover himself, his arms flailing in the air as he crashed onto the grass. His friends burst into laughter, unaware of Amanaki's involvement. "A little clumsy, Iakopa?" one of his friends teased. Iakopa growled, standing up with a red face. "It's nothing," he snapped, brushing off the dirt. But before he could recover, Amanaki, still hidden in the shadows, tugged on the hem of Iakopa's shirt like a breeze, pulling it gently over his head. The bully stumbled backward, now blinded by his own shirt. His friends, gasping and laughing, Iakopa flailed around, trying to pull it back down, but only tangled himself further. Lonnie couldn't hold back her laughter any longer. "Looks like Iakopa's having a hard time with his wardrobe," she shouted, doubling over in fits of giggles. From the shadows, Amanaki whispered, "Don't worry. I'm just making sure they're not a threat." Iakopa, now wrapped up in his shirt like a tangled mess, scowled. "This isn't funny," he yelled, but the humor was lost on him. His friends were in stitches, one of them clutching their stomach and barely able to breathe. Amanaki finally stepped out from the shadows, a grin on his face as he calmly approached Lonnie, who was still laughing. "Let's go, before they figure it out," Amanaki said, glancing back at the still struggling bullies. "They'll be busy for a while." As they turned toward the path to the beach, the village bullies were left behind. Their leader tingled and embarrassed. The air was filled with the sound of their frustrated shouts, but it only made Amanaki and Lana's steps lighter as they ran toward the boat. "You know," Lana said, her smile still wide, "it's nice to know we can sail in peace without those jerks getting in the way." Amanaki's eyes glinted with mischief. "I'm all for peace," he said with a wink, "but sometimes peace comes in unexpected forms." "Race you to the boats!" Together they raced to the village edge, a day of training at sea, a day filled with the promise of new adventure on the open water. As they raced to the beach, they see Alipate, the chief, standing at the edge of the path into the village. they hear one of the men shouting. Afi yells at the chief, "I will not be training the demon child." The air feels tense as these harsh words sting Amanaki. Alipate stands calm and firm as he rubs the back of his head before speaking. "The boy can train with me. I will take him along with Lana." The rest of the boys catch up and are immediately divided into groups of 2 per ship, with one of the men watching over them. Tomu and Iakopa, as always, are on the same team, with Afi standing next to them. Lana strides up to Amanaki and whispers, "When will those fools learn?" Tomu, a large boy, hears her and glares across at her. Alipate speaks loudly to the scattered groups once they are teamed up. "Today, we do more than practice. Today, we sail completely around the island. Until today, we have done so in small sections with the elders on your ship. The elders will be your instructors for sailing and fishing from now on. Once on the water, you will sail. The elder ship will be following behind as a safety vessel. You and your teammate will be on your own. The first team around the island will represent our tribe at the ceremonies held next month." The groups of children turn to each other and excitedly whisper. Iakopa gets elbowed by his father to speak. "Is it fair to have a girl and a demon spawn represent our tribe?" Alipate places his large hand on Lana's shoulder. "Sounds like you're scared they will beat you." Iakopa straightens up. "Not a chance! We will win for our tribe." Lana turns to Amanaki. "Life has been unkind to you, Amanaki. I will do everything I can to help you win this race. We have to win. This is your chance to show the tribe who you are." Amanaki stares off at the ocean in response, deep in thought. Alipate looks over the groups. "Each of you will be on one of the smaller ships lined up here on the beach. Once you are all on your ship, I will tell you to start. The first person around the island past the rocky outcropping in the bay wins." Some of the groups hurry and get on the boats. Amanaki walks around his boat, inspecting everything, retying knots, and looking for any damage to the hull. After he is satisfied, he helps Lana jump on. Then he jumps on and inspects the sails and the ropes. The teams finally get in position. "Go!" Alipate yells. "The first one around back to the bay wins and receives the honor to represent our tribe."